This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor starts today's show with a cattle market update. He explains changes in the market as well as how feedlot returns have moved and what he saw in the October meat demand monitor. Continuing the show is Briana Jacobus, Kansas Ag in the Classroom Marketing and Communications Director, to tell us about resources the foundation has available and how people can utilize them. 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock completes the show today as she discusses what 4-H has to provide for youth and how adults can support the organization. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update. And today we're joined by K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. Glynn, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Glynn, kicking off the cattle market conversation with what is cash cattle markets looking like?
Yeah, so there's a flat to down tone throughout the cattle markets. It's strongest in the futures market. We'll talk about that in a second. But narrowly for the cash market this past week, AMS called the 5-area fed cattle market on Friday at 180, and that would be off certainly compared to prior weeks. We're going to talk more about that in the futures. It's not as off as much as the futures, but we'll talk about the disconnect there in a second. Feeder cattle, Pratt market specifically, AMS called flat to lower, depending on what weight class I might bring to you here. Two of the larger lots, just for context for listeners here, is 264 head weighing 580 pounds, came in at 255. 301 head weighing 677 pounds, came in about 232. As a general comment, the Kansas calf run, we are towards the end of it. We're here the second week of November. It's still going, but we're towards the end, and it's gotten softer, which isn't necessarily new. That happens a lot of times, but there's a good $20, in some cases $30 per hundredweight off in the calf market compared to 4 or 6 weeks ago.
Glenn, you've mentioned the futures a few times, and so what are you seeing there?
Yeah, so the Friday close, December live cattle closed at $174. That's down a full $9 from the prior week. For context for our listeners, the nearby live cattle futures contracts are trading at about where they were the end of May. So the pullback is not just this past week. It's been going on for a little while. November feeder cattle closed at $230. That's down about $11 on the week. And again, for parallel, that's more like the levels we were early May. So we've given up a lot of the strength in the board in the last few weeks. This past week in particular was a notable pullback. I made a note here to kind of comment on why I think that's happened. There's probably several things at play there, but one of them that may not be talked about as much is there was a broad, let's call it commodity pullback this past week. So at one point, I believe it was Wednesday, crude oil was down over $5, and that sounds great if you buy gas, but there's some spillover effects in other commodities, and I think it is one of the forces specific to this week that pulled prices down more. And then the other one, which I'm sure other listeners, other commentators have been talking about for a few weeks, is the latest cattle on feed report and some other things gave us a little bit of a pause on the tight supply story. Some context is important. We still have tight supplies in a long year since. The number of mama cows isn't larger than we thought and so forth, but the number of animals in the feed yard is a little higher than we thought. So the near-term fed cattle supply was a little larger than we thought, and I think that's still weighing on the market too.
Are we still seeing some of those down numbers then for box beef cutout?
Yeah, but not as drastic, and this is good. Maybe we could have some reversal and help pull up the cattle prices again from this. But choice on Friday closed at $300. That was down $2 on the week. Select was $267, down about $5 on the week. And we're going to transition here in a minute. We'll talk consumer demand, but box beef comparatively has held up better than we might have expected.
And Glenn, something you usually talk about when you come on is feedlot returns, and so what are we seeing on those?
Yeah, and this is not a fun update, but it's related to what I was talking about earlier. The fed cattle price pullback shows up notably in the feedlot return expectations. So quickly, most of our listeners probably know every month I take information from the Animal Science and Industries Focus on Feedlot survey and marry it up with a whole bunch of Kansas market information and then forward-looking from the futures to come up with projected net margins if a steer left the Kansas yard each of the next 9 months. This is a risk management absent plan. So we're presuming you pay cash for feeders, cash for corn, take cash for fed. All those disclaimers aside, that leads to these margins being very volatile because there's no risk management in place. The current numbers are projected to remain positive through here in November, but then be negative starting in December. So specifically November, and I just put these, they're going to be on Ag Manager here today, November closeouts plus $72, December closeouts minus $62. So we're at that flip point here, think around Thanksgiving. That's quite different than a month ago and certainly 2 months ago when I was putting these out. And it starts, and it's primarily with, there's been over a $10 per hundredweight fed cattle sales price pullback. So, you're talking north of $150 per head effect from that alone, if you would compare this latest report with the past couple. The other part to add to that is, I don't put this in the report, but again, all good geeks track lots of things. I have a running 12-month net return series. So I put out the individual ones, but there's an average of the past 12, and it's a broad, think about a metric of kind of equity in the feed yard, how things have been going over the last 12 cumulatively. And that is set to basically peak here in November and then start being eroding. And by the time we get to the summer, specifically June of 24, that running 12-month average would actually become negative. So we're sort of at the best spot in a cumulative returns right now. And the current projections would say we're going to erode through those 12-month average returns between now through next summer for anybody that didn't have hedges in place. Now, that's why I always remind folks, if you did have your cattle hedged, then you haven't experienced the same pullback. But the cash-to-cash-to-cash situation has definitely deteriorated a lot in the feedlot sector in the last, I'll say, 4 weeks.
And as we've talked about cattle markets, kind of for those producers, something else important for producers is what consumers are doing. And that comes with your meat demand monitor.
Yeah, so again, we track a lot of demand information here. The latest would be from the beef and pork checkoff supported meat demand monitor. The October information is out. Just some nuggets for our listeners here. In October, willingness to pay through the grocery store, the retail channel, was up on 6 of the 8 evaluated products, which is great. That included ribeye steak, ground beef, pork chops, several that we regularly track. When we flicked over to food service, it was actually even stronger. 7 of the 8 meals, specifically the dinner meals, we're assessing what you're willing to pay to have a center-of-the-plate, meat entree in your dinner meal away from home. The only item that was not was ribeye steak. And I'm doing that call out because it's a segue for some financial concerns I'll talk about in a moment. One of the other things I want to highlight here is protein values is a section of those reports, and we ask folks of the following 12 things, so taste, freshness, safety, price, nutrition, health, appearance, convenience, hormone or antibiotic-free, animal welfare, origin traceability, and environmental impact. And yes, that's a long list. This is all on AgManager.info. We ask which of those 4 are most important in your protein purchasing decision and which of the 4 are least. And, of course, if you skipped them, they're the 4 intermediate. And that allows me to give what we call a net zero score because you can only pick 4 top, 4 little. Price is ranking very high historically. So we started this project in February of 2020. Price was the 3rd highest in our series here in October. The others were also in 2023. So the importance of price in making protein purchasing decisions is notably higher here in 2023 than it has been in other months. Remember, most of those months were throughout the pandemic when we had a lot of uncertainty. Consumers are quite concerned about their finances is what I'm trying to drive home.
And so from all this, however, consumers are still wanting to eat pork and beef and meat products.
They are, and there's a lot of different ways we could talk about that in this survey, but maybe the simplest one is we ask folks, how do you self-declare your diet? So do you consider yourself a regular meat consumer? Are you a flexitarian? So you have meat products, but sometimes you purposely avoid it in a given meal. Are you vegan? Are you vegetarian? And we have in north of 70% and several months north of 75%, so over 3/4 saying they're regularly consuming meat products. And an additional 10 to 12% say they're a flexitarian. So when you sum those up, we're conservatively over 80 and usually more like 85% are ongoing meat consumers. That, of course, is great for the beef industry and the pork industry that are listening to this segment. But more generally, I think that's important is, yes, there's some household financial concerns, and that's going to be my final comment in a moment, but there are still ongoing efforts to keep meat protein in the diet.
And something you always mention when it comes to the meat demand monitor, Glynn, is how much money people feel like they have is a big impact on this.
Yep. And that is the last, what we call the ad hoc section of this past report. We follow something from the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Survey. Most of our listeners probably know that's an effort that's been going on like over 40 years. And simply I'm asking, are your household finances better, the same, or worse than they were a year ago? And in October, 21% indicated their finances are better than last year. And that's great for those 21% of our public. But unfortunately, that means 79% don't think they're better. 35% actually say it's worse, and the balance say it's the same. The relevance for our listeners here is there's notably lower rates of consumption of beefsteak, chicken breast and pork chops if you say your finances have gotten worse. So this is not surprising. Most economists would say meat proteins tend to be some of the more expensive items in our food basket. Demand for those is stronger when our incomes go up. And one step away from that statement is if your financial sentiment and your situation is deteriorating, your incomes probably haven't been going up. So these go hand in hand with what economists would expect. Hopefully, as we move through this holiday season, we get through into 2024. Maybe we get past some of the current macroeconomic clouds. Some of that bearish financial sentiment will change, and maybe that can be an additional boost for meat demand broadly.
Glynn, to shortly just sum up the cattle market, what is it looking like?
Turmoil in a way we didn't expect a month ago. So time stamping thing is really important. So in the past week, there's a strong bearish tone. That's what we had to pull back on fed cattle and feeder cattle prices. But the long-term supply story really hasn't changed. It's a short-term timing thing. So timing of our comments is really important here. So we're in November. So November, December, maybe even through the first quarter of 2024, things don't look as positive as they did even just 6 weeks ago. But if I was to look forward to like summer grazing returns, turning cattle out in the Flint Hills this coming summer, or selling a calf into 2024, those are still very large positive margins are being projected because you're getting past that short term or kind of intermediate term, if you like. So it depends on what segment and what timing of the cattle market you asked me about. But there's a bearish tone that's weighing on the near-term markets.
And Glenn, if people would like to come hear some comments or possibly read them later on, where can they do that?
So tomorrow I'll be in Beloit, Kansas. You're welcome to come join us for the Central Kansas Beef Summit. Most won't be able to join us in Beloit, certainly at this late notice kind of thing. But I always put a PDF of those slides, so you can go to AgManager.info to find those slides. Everything you and I talked about is from some other resource that's on AgManager, whether it's the MDM reports, the feedlot returns, those kind of things. So I encourage our listeners to make use of that resource.
Glenn, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us our cattle market update.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me on.
That was K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. I will link AgManager.info in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show now discussing Kansas Foundation for Ag in the Classroom and some of the resources they have for people. And then to talk about this, we're joined by Communications and Marketing Director for Kansas Foundation for Ag in the Classroom, Briana Jacobus. Briana, thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me, Shelby.
Briana, before we dive into some of those different resources you have for people, what is the Kansas Foundation for Ag in the Classroom?
Kansas Foundation for Ag in the Classroom is a statewide self-funded nonprofit that provides educational resources, trainings, and support for educators, schools, volunteers, really anyone that wants to spark those meaningful connections between classrooms and Kansas agriculture.
And Ag in the Classroom has many resources available to hopefully help create those sparks and encourage them.
Yes, we have tons of free resources on our website and tons of services ranging from lesson plans that are connected to state standards and national ag literacy outcomes to supporting resources, posters, worksheets, trainings, virtual tours, and so much more on our website.
And this is something then for teachers and students, but really parents or anyone who might be helping take care of children or want to teach them a little bit about agriculture.
Yes, we have tons of resources for teachers, but also for volunteers. So if you're a parent that goes into the classroom, a county coordinator for a farm bureau or conservation district, all our resources are perfect for you as well.
And Briana, you mentioned a virtual AgriLand, and could you share a little bit more information about that?
Yeah, so this was a project that came about after the state fair was canceled in 2020. We have a very large booth with a variety of partners across the state at the Kansas State Fair. And we decided that we could just expand that learning year-round through something we call Virtual AgriLand. So on our website, you can find Virtual AgriLand split up into 4 different grade groups. And once you enter a grade group, you can find resources on all sorts of different Kansas commodities and different Kansas animals, livestock that are raised here. Within each different commodity, you can find resources from a virtual tour to a lesson plan, an activity, a book to go with it, as well as our Kids Connection magazines that are perfect for 3rd through 5th grade readers.
And what is one of your favorite virtual tours within that?
Oh, we have so many great virtual tours throughout there. Obviously, wheat is very big in Kansas, and so we have a tour of a Kansas wheat farm on our website, and I definitely encourage you to go check that one out.
Briana, you guys have a bunch of different activities at the Kansas Foundation for Ag in the Classroom. However, since it is kind of Thanksgiving time and sometimes pumpkins are associated with that holiday, one activity that there is on your website is pumpkin exploration.
Pumpkin exploration is a great lesson to use in your classroom throughout October and November to just help kids explore pumpkins in a different way, but also make it applicable to things you already have to be teaching in the classroom.
And wanting to mention that you do have these educational resources broken up in a few different ways, so hopefully people who are looking for different things can easily find them.
Yes, we've tried to make our website as user-friendly as possible. So within our education center, we have a resource center that breaks down our lesson plans, our supporting resources, our kids' magazines, and our educator guides. And within our lesson plans, like you said, you can sort by multiple different ways. So if you're looking for a specific ag topic, or if you're looking for a specific grade, we've made it very easy to go in there and sort by those different things.
And what exactly are those volunteer educator guides?
So one of the educator guides that we've made in the last few years is a volunteer educator guide. And that guide is perfect for anyone that wants to go into the classroom and volunteer. We've made it very easy for you to take any of the lessons in that guide to show a teacher the standards that it teaches, and then go in and do an activity with the kids. These activities are anywhere from 5 minutes to a few hours to activities that are done a few minutes at a time over multiple days. One of our favorites that we're expanding on over the next year is Apple Earth. And we have multiple different versions of that activity that volunteers can go into the classroom and do with the kids. This activity is all based around conservation and how we're going to feed the world.
If someone's listening and is wanting to go teach some agriculture in the classroom, what would your recommendation be for getting started?
Yeah, so the first way I would say to start is definitely get connected with us. Go to our website and just start checking out all the different resources that we offer. While you're on our website, go ahead and sign up for our educator newsletter. Each month, we send out a newsletter to all of our educators that are in our database. And those newsletters include anything from lessons that are applicable that month to grants that are only available to teachers, scholarships to attend our different events or national events, and anything that our partners are doing as well, whether that be lesson plans or free resources to teachers. And then also make sure you follow us on social media. We post all of our resources and information on Facebook, and you can find us there at KS Ag Classroom.
And Briana, are these resources free for people to use?
All of the resources, the lesson plans, the posters, everything on our website is free for anyone to go in there and download.
And Briana, is there a way that people could support the Kansas Foundation for Ag in the Classroom?
Yes, so we are always accepting donations on our website, but a few times a year we have different giving days. Giving Tuesday is coming up on November 28th. That's a global giving day that it just encourages people to give to local nonprofits. And like I said earlier, we are a self-funded nonprofit, so all of our programming funds and our salaries come from these donations. So it's really all of the donors that make the programming that we have possible.
Briana, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some information about the Kansas Foundation for Ag in the Classroom and some of its resources.
Yeah, Shelby, thanks for having me.
That was Communications and Marketing Director for Kansas Foundation for Ag in the Classroom, Briana Jacobus. If you'd like to find out more information about Kansas Ag in the Classroom, you can do so by going to their website at ksagclassroom.org. Again, that is ksagclassroom.org. On that website, you can find all the resources that we talked about today, as well as have educators sign up for their monthly newsletter. I will put links to both of those in today's show notes on agtoday.net. You can also follow Kansas Ag in the Classroom on Facebook at KS Ag Classroom. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by USDA's Rod Bain and economic researcher Matthew Rabbit as they discuss what the results are within USDA's latest look at domestic household food security.
Food insecurity in the U.S. as of 2022 is up from the previous year. Among the findings in USDA's latest edition of the Household Food Security in the U.S. report.
Food insecurity increased from 10.2% in 2021 to 12.8% in 2022.
That's USDA research economist Matthew Rabbit, one of the authors of this year's Household Food Security report.
The annual prevalence rate of food insecurity is determined by many factors, including the economy, federal, state, and local policies, and the individual circumstances of U.S. households. This particular report does not provide an analysis of the possible causal explanations for changes in food insecurity from year to year. However, we do know from prior research that increases in nutrition assistance and other forms of assistance reduce food insecurity.
Looking at the specific food security versus food insecurity percentages in 2022, plus providing definitions for both categories within the USDA report,
87.2% of U.S. households were food secure throughout the year in 2022. And food secure means that these households had consistent access to adequate food for an active, healthy living for all household members throughout the year. The remaining 12.8% of U.S. households were food insecure in 2022. And food insecure households were unable at some time during the year to provide adequate food in terms of the quantity or quality of food for one or more household members due to a lack of resources.
Another category of interest in the annual survey, the percentage of very low food security.
Very low food security occurs when the normal eating patterns of some household members is disrupted at times during the year for one or more household members. So this represents the most severe range of the severity of food insecurity that we can measure using USDA food security measurement system. In 2022, 5.1% of U.S. households had very low food security, and this was statistically significantly higher than the 3.8% that was estimated in 2021 and the 3.9% estimated for 2020.
8.8% of children were food insecure at times in 2022, up from 6.2% the prior year. Rabbit adds,
between 2021 and 2022, we're actually seeing increases in food insecurity among the majority of household demographic groups. So there are very, very few exceptions where we did not see an increase in food insecurity and very low food security.
He also notes the correlation between food and nutrition assistance program participation and food security status.
In this particular report, we find that 55% of food insecure households in our survey reported that in the previous month they participated in one or more of the three largest federal nutrition assistance programs, which includes SNAP, WIC, and the National School Lunch Program. In addition, we find that roughly 40% utilize SNAP.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Once again, that was the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rod Bain, an economic researcher with the USDA, Matthew Rabbit, and they were discussing results within USDA's latest look at domestic household food security. If you'd like to see more media from the USDA, you can do so by going to USDA.gov/media. I will link that in today's show notes, which, as always, you can find on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be having a discussion with 4-H Youth Development Extension Specialist Amy Sollock about 4-H. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show discussing 4-H. And then to talk about 4-H, we're joined by 4-H Youth Development Extension Specialist in the Southwest region, Amy Sollock. Amy, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Amy, before we hop into talking a little bit about 4-H and the different activities people can do, what is 4-H?
4-H is a youth development organization for young people as early as age 5. We have a Cloverbud program for 5 and 6-year-olds. 4-H membership actually begins at age 7. And it's a lot of things to different people. It's kind of what you make of it. And it's not a one-size-fits-all, but I think the important thing at the end of the day is that young people truly gain skills to lead them to a successful adulthood. And that may be leadership. It might be communication skills. It might be self-confidence. But kids get so much out of 4-H, and it really is a wholesome environment for the entire family to get involved.
And part of the development can sometimes come from projects within 4-H, and there's a wide variety.
Yeah, we have a long tradition of learning by doing. And so in Kansas 4-H, we actually have over 35 different project areas that 4-H members can select from. Anything that, might pique their interest, a hobby, something that they know a lot about, or maybe something that they know very little about. Everything from astronomy and robotics to foods and nutrition, to visual arts and woodworking. I mean, you name it, we've got it.
A lot of different activities to do, and sometimes even away from the county fair, big state activities to meet fellow 4-Hers.
Yeah, social skills, social development is a really big part of 4-H. We want every young person to learn about themselves, to gain self-confidence, and have that ability to network and make friends. And it starts right there in their local 4-H club, where they literally learn this sense of belonging. And, as they get a little older and begin to venture out, there's opportunities to meet kids outside of their county and all across the state at various Kansas 4-H events.
For 4-H, there is an enrollment that is needed and has opened up for this upcoming year.
Our new 4-H program year started October 1. We technically have an open enrollment year-round, so there isn't really a deadline per se to join 4-H. There are some projects and some events that have specific deadlines, but you can join 4-H all year long.
And something associated with 4-H, and a lot of times I see campers love going to, is Rock Springs.
Absolutely. Kansas 4-H Camp at Rock Springs Ranch is just this magical experience, and we've been doing it for decades, and it's really one of our strongest programs. We're so proud of the camping facilities at Rock Springs Ranch. And actually, registration for the summer of 2024 opens November 15th, and there's an early bird deadline to register. You get a little discount on that, but it's not too early to be thinking about 4-H camp already.
As we are thinking about 4-H, for people who maybe don't know the structure of 4-H, could you share a little bit about that?
If you're unfamiliar with 4-H, typically a young person will join a 4-H club in their community. Sometimes it's associated with a school or maybe an after-school program or something at the library. But typically you'll see 4-H clubs that are kind of located, in a specific town, and they have families that all go to school together and, play sports together, and then they join a 4-H club. And what's cool about a 4-H club is it's really a great dynamic between youth-led, voices and that supportive parent adult volunteer structure. It's really a perfect combination of a safe environment to explore their interests and, succeed together and even maybe do some trial and error. It's not always perfect, but it's a great environment to learn with one another.
And 4-H volunteers are something that's really important to the organization.
Yes, it is. We have lots of different adult volunteer roles. Club leaders would be one of our biggest needs, as well as project leaders. If you're an adult volunteer and you're looking to teach skills to kids in any one of our different project areas, we'd love to find a place for you to help those young people out.
And for youth or adults who are looking to find more information about 4-H, how can they do that?
Visit our website at kansas4-h.org.
That was 4-H Youth Development Extension Specialist in the Southwest region, Amy Sollock. I will link the resource that she mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. That's all we have for you this Monday on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.